Just really quick setting of the context here. I think probably all of you as SSDA members will have got an email from the SSDA about this. I suppose that the key thing I'm keen to emphasize at the start of this session is it's very likely that there are quite strong opinions about some of the things that we're talking about today. And I'm really keen to emphasize the strength of partnership that we have as an industry with our two councils and with SSDA and Visit Scotland. And that is an immense strength of the south of Scotland. And if I know if Visit Scotland were here speaking openly, they would say that probably more than anywhere else in Scotland, we've got our ducks in a row. We've got one single responsible tourism strategy. We've got an action plan. We've got 5 agencies working together. So every Tuesday, I meet with 2 councils, with SSDA and Visit Scotland. We go through the nuts and bolts of what needs to be done this week and next week to support and develop tourism over the next 10 years in ways that will grow the industry by £1 billion. From my perspective, where there are, sensitive and nuanced and potentially difficult topics, and I would probably put visitor levy into that box, it's more important than ever to have that respectful exchange and to have a collaborative approach. And credit to Dumfries and Galloway Council in deciding recently, and I'm sure John will say more about this in a moment, to move to early engagement to explore the possibility of a visitor levy. They have been committed from the absolute outset to listening to industry, and this is one of a number of opportunities to be able to do that. So we're joined today by my friend John King from Dumfries and Galloway Council, and really most of today is going to be listening to John talking about what the visitor levy is and what the process is. There's also going to be time for you to ask any questions you have for John, and for you to be able to share your views. But as we will reiterate through the morning, it's really important that you complete the online survey at the end of today's discussion, because the views that you express today, while it will inform, John, it's not going to be captured as a formal submission into this consultation. So I'm sure John will elaborate on that. But as I know you will, I'm really keen to keep this a positive and constructive discussion where everyone is able to share very clearly their views on this subject matter. Probably helpful before I turn to John to have just a really quick roundtable introduction. And that I haven't found a better way of doing this than doing the sort of schoolmaster thing where I read out a name and you say hello. But if that's okay, if you're able to turn on your camera, that would be lovely, and no problem to turn it off while John's speaking. Perhaps if we could start with Erin B, if you could introduce yourself and your organisation.
Hello, I'm Erin, and this is Nick Bullard. We're at the Moffat Distillery in Moffat, making whiskey and gin and fruit whiskey liqueurs, and it's very much for visitors. And so this is why we are here.
Fantastic. Well, Erin and Nick, really delighted to have you with us. Wendy, if you're happy to go next.
Hi there. Most people I think know me by now. My name's Wendy Murray. I work for Calabric Estate. I'm in charge of their holiday accommodation. So very interested in what the levy is going to do for us.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Christine Milligan, I've got a sort of ominous blob, but if you're there, Christine, do introduce yourself.
I'm sorry, I don't know why that's gone to a blob. Anyway, sorry, I Christine Milligan, husband here, Norman Milligan, and we have Port Logan Lodge holiday lets. So we're holiday accommodation down towards the Mull of Galloway.
Fantastic. Well, Christine and Norman, very welcome. Great to have you with us. And thank you for not taking offence when I described you as a blob earlier on. I meant it in the nicest possible way. So I have to go by what names are on the screen. So Hive Manager, if you're happy to introduce yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, it's the first time using this headset. I'm not entirely familiar with it. So Billy Jones, I'm the project manager for the Glentrool Hive, which is a community-led visitor centre, and we also have a self-catering unit that we rent out to visitors in the area as well.
Fantastic. Great to have you with us, Billy. Linda's iPad.
Hi, Linda Dodds, husband and wife. We own Hunter's Lodge Hotel in Gretna, which is a bedroom hotel. We've got a restaurant and function room.
Fantastic, wonderful, great to have you with us, Linda. Aviv.
Hi, I'm sort of here with 2 separate sort of hats on. I'm one of the directors of Kikuber Summer Festivities, So that's one side. And then in my sort of real job, I work in business support and marketing for self-catering businesses. So both quite interested in the subject.
Fantastic, wonderful. Well, great to have you with us. And friendly faces just popped up. Mel, go ahead.
Hi everyone. Just joining, just of interest really. I've been following what's happening with the TVL across Scotland. I'm director of SCOTO, which is Scottish Community Tourism, and we've operated supporting communities across Scotland. So I'm just really interested to join conversations this morning.
Great to have you with us, Mel, as always. Hannah Beck. You never know when the oh, go ahead, Hannah.
You can hear. So Hannah's actually just disappeared. So I'm Holly, I'm the financial controller here at the Cocoa Bean Company. So we are just interested to see how this levy will have a knock-on impact on our tourist sector.
Fantastic.
With the Cocoa Bean Company.
Holly and Hannah, great to have you with us. I'm really sorry, I missed the name of the company. I just had a bit of static.
The Cocoa Bean Company in China.
Cocoa Bean, fantastic, wonderful. Well, brilliant to have you both with us from Cocoa Bean. Thanks very much, Holly and Hannah. Peter.
Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Nazette. I'm from the private sector originally, but from all walks of life in the travel industry, and I've been living in Newton Stewart for over 11 years. Now destination development and destination marketing specialist, and have been private as a freelancer, operating around the globe for the last 40 odd years. So interested in what's happening in the south of Scotland, and hopefully to bring some global perspective on what the discussion may be able to bring, and maybe some outcomes of some little bit of homework that I've been doing over the last few days since I was sent this by my colleague and friend David Inglis.
Fantastic, wonderful. Well, great to have you with us, Peter. Looking forward to the Newton Stewart and beyond perspective. Thank you. Angie Ross. You never know when a camera's off, if someone's fumbling for the unmute button, or if they've gone to make a cup of tea. There we go, Angie.
I was fumbling for the unmute button. You're right. Can you hear me?
We can, yes, Angie, loud and clear.
Yeah, I'm Angie Ross. I'm the owner, manager, dog's body, everything else of Laird Lodges holiday accommodation in Lochmaven. We've got holiday lodges with hot tubs and various self-catering accommodation here and abroad, and I'm interested just to see. I'm busy doing changeovers and emptying hot tubs, which is why my camera's not on, but I am listening.
Great stuff. Well, we've all got a brilliant image of you bailing a hot tub. I'm sure there's more sophisticated ways of doing it. Jenny Chapman.
There is. We've got lovely pumps. It's fine. We're on our way. But if MD feels free, give us a hand sometime. But anyway, enjoy the meeting and good luck. Okay.
Great stuff. Thanks ever so much, Angie. Last but not least, Jenny Chapman.
Hi, I'm here with sort of two hats on. I'm the co-owner of Kilkenny Estate Holiday Cottages. We've got 3 self-catering holiday cottages. I'm also the chair of the local community shop and cafe, where we do rely on visitors to keep us afloat in the summer. I'm very concerned about anything that's going to impact on the number of visitors that come to Dumfries and Galloway. I mean, the holiday cottages, okay, that's it's tough, but the community cafe, it's almost impossible to keep going, and very, very concerned.
Okay, well, Jenny, thank you very much for joining us. Friends, with that, if I may, I'm going to turn to John King, who's the lead of tourism in Dumfries and Galloway Council. And what I would ask is that we listen to all of John's presentation, then we're going to throw it up to a really, really open Q&A. And again, keen to start by thanking John for making the time to come along and to engage. And as I'll reiterate at the end of the session, John's also going to come to all of the D&G locally led destination development meetings, so he's making a real commitment to listen to industry. John, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. So I will just share my presentation. Can somebody give me a thumbs up that that's working?
Yeah, that's working.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. Just to explain who I am, I'm essentially the tourism lead for D&G Council, and so visitor levy fits into my remit. You're probably aware of Edinburgh leading the way on the tourism levy, and they're looking to start coming in July of next year. The way the process works is that we undertake, and this is mandated by Visit Scotland and by government legislation, we undertake an early engagement. So this is a broad and open process by which we're trying to gather views from residents, from businesses, from community groups, and also from visitors. So we very much, as David has emphasised, doing this in partnership with the SSDA. So they're helping us get to visitors, which is obviously quite a tricky thing, because it's of the time of year we're doing it, and getting out there with clipboards is prohibitively expensive. So this will run until November the 21st. As David mentioned, there's an online survey. This has been run by 56 Degrees Insight, who are a very well-respected tourism survey company. So what they will do is they will produce an independent report. That independent report will come to us, and we're known as officers in the lingo of how it works. We will then make some recommendations. Those will go to a council meeting, and that council meeting will then decide, do we want to go into formal consultation? So this is a very broad process, saying what do people think. If it were to go forward to formal consultation, then some of the different decisions that can be made, which I'll take you through, it would say, well, it's this percentage, it includes this people, it covers this amount, businesses receive this much back. That would go forward as a very specific recommendation. Then there'd be 12 weeks of further consultation, which would follow government guidelines on consultations, and that a final report will come back, and then councillors would then vote on whether they want it to go forward. So we'll get a little bit more into the timelines, but I wanted to put this into context to say, it's an open process. It's being run by a third party. I'm obviously working with them. If you don't, exactly what David says, if you don't fill the online form, whatever you say in this kind of arena, won't go forward into the final report. So you need to actually express your opinions. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. And we're going to run through this in two ways. We're going to run through a set of FAQs, the questions that most people ask as a way of exploring it. And then the big question is really, well, if you're getting all this money, what are you going to do with it? So the second part of the presentation will be looking at where could the money be spent, and what are the mechanics for deciding how that money is spent. So first of all, what is a visitor levy? It's essentially a percentage added on to the cost of overnight accommodation. So if you provide a package that might include bed and breakfast, or it might include other ancillary parts to your accommodation offering, then those would not be included, and there'll be an agreement about, well, of the amount you pay for bed and breakfast, say 70 quid, £15 that is breakfast, and then the other £55 is overnight accommodation, and therefore whatever the percentage is added on to that cost of the overnight accommodation, and we'll come to that in a little bit more. There has been some movement for it to be a flat rate, and 3 or 4 weeks ago there was something went forward that looked like that would be an option. Essentially that may be an option in the future, but at this moment it's not an option. There's obviously elections coming up, so it's probably a couple of years away at the least, and Scottish government legislation only allows us to go with a percentage, and so the research proposal that we're doing will talk about percentages, not flat rates. So it could end up being a flat rate. If you look around globally, there's a mixture of percentages and flat rates out there at the moment, depending on which country that you're in. So each council has an opportunity to either have or not have a visitor levy and go through a consultation process, and we'll look at, some people have said yes and some people have said no later on. This slide is saying, look, which countries in some areas or regions have a visitor levy. Okay, so it's not saying that everywhere you go in France you're going to pay a visitor levy, but it's going to say if you go to France, you're not unlikely to pay a visitor levy. And what you can see is that we are following. There's no visitor levy at the moment in England. There are some cities, Liverpool and Manchester, where the hotels have got together as part of a business improvement district and are starting to put one in because they believe that it will help them provide a better product. But you'll find it's widespread through Europe, and a lot of people, and you may be one of them, have paid it in their holidays. This is kind of where we are now. It's constantly changing. What we've got is the three that are definitely going ahead: Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Aberdeen. Edinburgh going ahead with a 5% levy. As I said, starting from July next year, they capped it at 5 nights. That's really around their fringe performers coming and staying in accommodation and not wanting to penalise them. The vast majority of people that visit Edinburgh won't stay 5 nights. They'll stay less than that. So it doesn't particularly impact the revenue that they'll get. Their funds will go to the infrastructure of the city, keeping it clean, graffiti, keeping it up to scratch. They're supporting their events industry. They're supporting their direct marketing organisations. So how do they promote Edinburgh? And they're putting money into that. There is some money going to housing and there's some money going into community projects. Glasgow are next up. They're a little bit behind. So January 2027. And they're, again, city operations, which is a similar thing. How do we keep the city clean and up to date and a pleasant place to come? A lot of stuff is going into culture and into marketing the city itself to get more people to come. And there are some fixed amounts for housing and tourism mitigation, i.e. where's tourism? Do they believe tourism is creating a problem for communities? And how can they spend money in that? And participatory budgeting is a word for local communities saying where they would like money to be spent. Aberdeen have got a higher levy. Their logic for that is that their hotel prices are fairly low, 70 quid. And so the practical outcome of a 7% levy is about £5. So they're happy because they believe the cash amount is lower to go with a higher percentage. And all their money is spent on attracting more people into the city. They're obviously a big conference venue. And so supporting and attracting conferences there, culture and sporting events and activities, that's kind of where all their money will be focused. There are some other councils considering a levy, so they're in generally in the formal consultation. That's West Dunbartonshire, Perth and Kinross, Highland, Stirling. I'm reading, you can read this as well as me, can't you? And then there are councils that have decided, because the feedback they've got, not to go ahead. So the Highlands and Islands really are much more keen on a cruise ship levy because that's the majority of their tourism. And South Ayrshire got quite a lot of negative responses. East Ayrshire wasn't on it, but they have recently said they're not going ahead. But that was really around the fact they have a very small tourism industry and the amount of hassle for the money they would earn was pretty small. That one in the middle that obviously you can't read is one of the other islands, which I think is the Outer Hebrides. I can't read it either. So, but basically the islands have said they don't want to go ahead. So there's been a mixture of responses. And I think this demonstrates that the consultations are real and that they make a difference. At the end of the day, it will be councillors to make the decision. Okay. How much is a visitor levy? In essence, it's the percentage we've talked to. How does that work out? If you've got £100 a night stay, that will become £105. If you paid VAT and it was £100, there's unfortunately VAT on the levy, so that would become £106. That money is collected by the council, and then the council can disperse it in whichever way they think is appropriate, which we'll come to in a minute. What I would say, the numbers are considerable. This doesn't raise a small amount, it would raise a considerable amount. Those are the forecasts: Aberdeen 7 million, Highlands 10 million, Glasgow 17 million, and Edinburgh 45 to 50 million pounds a year. So it's a significant sum. We've done some initial calculations. This is not an official figure, so I'm only sharing this in webinars, that says it's somewhere in the region of 4 to 6 million. We're getting the Moffat Centre to look at that. But I think the message I want you to take away is the reason why the council is interested in this and doing the early engagement is it does have a genuine opportunity to move the needle, and to actually invest in a way that's not possible without the visitor levy. So as part of the consultation, we're asking about what the objectives should be. And there's 3 objectives we put down. These are in line with the responsible tourism strategy that we developed with the partnership, as David mentioned earlier. We took about a year talking to people, getting feedback before we did that. So it reflects what people want. And I think these objectives, who wouldn't want them really? Grow the visitor economy by inspiring visitors to come year round, developing the visitor experience and supporting tourism businesses. So that would, all of you guys would be front and center of one of the objectives. We need a robust, thriving tourist sector, accommodation, visitor attractions in the area to attract people. Develop and protect infrastructure and services used by visitors and communities. So the money is ring-fenced. The language used by the legislation is substantially used by visitors. But what this means is there's a lot of facilities and infrastructure that is used by both. So paths, town centres, and it's infrastructure that has to be supported by the council. You can't, as individual businesses, really change that, but it's a key part of why people come. So a lot of people would come to the area for the outdoors, for the town centres, and obviously that falls in the remit of the council. And thirdly, act responsibly, so it's long-term benefit for communities, visitors and environment. So this is really saying there are areas where there are clashes between communities and tourism, mostly around motorhomes in our area. Other areas have different issues, but this will be part of that. How can we provide a welcoming area without and mitigate some of the issues? And we'll get into that. So that's the 3 objectives that we're proposing. This is what could the money be spent on. This list is in the feedback. And if you say, well, a visitor, the way the feedback works is you can say, I don't support visitor levy at all, and then you won't be asked these questions. But if you think that it may be a good idea, then you'll be given an opportunity to say, how do you think it will be spent? I'm not going to dive into this now because we dive into it in a bit more detail in a minute. Right, I think I've just seen something from Jenny on the chat. Right. Yes, we'll come to those questions in a minute. What I'll do, Jenny, is I'll come back to those because I think we cover most of them, and I'll check at the end whether we've answered that. So what accommodation is covered by the visitor levy? And basically, part of the decisions people can make is whether it covers all accommodation or none of the accommodation, or different sectors rather than that's just nonsense. So basically all the areas that have gone forward have said all accommodation is covered. In Edinburgh, there was a proposal because they had very few campsites. They got 3 campsites in Edinburgh City. So they said, well, we won't include them. The feeling they got back from businesses, well, if I'm paying it, why shouldn't somebody in a campsite pay it? And so in a sense, they leveled that playing field and everybody did it. But you'll have a chance to say if you think a certain type of accommodation could be excluded, and that would go forward. And that's something we have a choice about. Does everybody pay the visitor levy? Those who are on disability can claim back the visitor levy. This is children and adults. The way it would work is you would pay it in the accommodation. So there's nothing about accommodation providers trying to check whether somebody's exempt or not. They would just pay it, and then they would have a chance to apply to the council with evidence and then to get it reimbursed. So disabled people or people on these benefits, including children, which has been added to this, can definitely claim it back, and that's legislatively required. So we have to do that. but councils can choose to exempt other groups. In some areas, I think Stirling are talking about, no, Aberdeen are talking about exempting people who come to Aberdeen City for medical reasons. I'm slightly nervous about how you would prove that, but that's something they've decided to do. Other areas have exempted local residents, and I think another area is exempted charity groups. So again, if you fill in the form, you can express an opinion if anybody should be exempted. We'll obviously we'll get feedback from residents as well, and that may go forward as an exemption. The only thing I would say is the more people you exempt, the more admin there is in making sure they are paid out, and how much do you spend on admin. But the bit I want you to understand is that it won't affect you as accommodation providers. You won't have to make these judgments. You won't have to look at it. Is there a cap? Again, this is a decision that Edinburgh have obviously made that we covered earlier, and will be in councillors' opinions. If you think there should be a cap, then express that opinion. We probably have people come and stay longer than they would in city locations. Any cap would apply to each place you stayed. It wouldn't apply to the total length of your visit. When would it come in? There's a very formal, careful process. The earliest it could come in is 2028. That's because the next stage, as I mentioned, has to have formal consultation. It has to be voted on. And then there's an 18-month implementation window. I think one of the advantages we've got at this stage is by the time we get to do it, Edinburgh will have been doing it for probably a year and a half minimum. Glasgow will have been doing it for a year. And so some of the processes, some of the way, how does this work? How does that work? How does the interface work? Which we'll talk about in a minute, will have been ironed out. And we'll be, I think, joining at a time where the methodology and some of the issues have become clear. Would the visitor levy apply to all of D&G? Again, in all the areas there are, it's been applied uniformly across the region. I think for the reasons you'd expect, why should one region be exempted? So basically it has been applied everywhere. But again, if you believe there's an area that should be exempted, you can express that, and that will go forward, and councillors can think about whether they want to exempt an area. How do I express my views? I think we've covered that. That's in the research, and we'll make sure you've got a link to that. If you do want to delve into it in a bit more detail, then Visit Scotland do publish some guidelines. They're really aimed at local governments. So if you want to read the 68 pages of guidance, you're very welcome. But hopefully I've covered most of this and we can answer your questions. Okay. How might the levy affect businesses? Who collects the visitor levy? That is accommodation providers. It's done on a quarterly basis. There would be a digital interface, and you'd be able to go into that and say, well, this many people stayed, this is how much they spent, and then it would say, well, you owe this much visitor levy. That's been worked on. It's very likely to be a national interface, so that if somebody's got multiple properties across different local regions that are subject to the visitor levy, they should be able to use the same interface. And there's a lot of work going through to make this as simple as possible. And I think, again, I would hope that this would, the rough edges, that there's bound to be learnings, will, by the time we get there, have been rubbed off. And we would obviously be able to make that interface work for whatever the local situation is for us in terms of percentages we give back to business and things like that. Okay, can businesses be compensated for collecting the visitor levy? I think there's an awareness that there are some costs in the visitor levy, that as it has to be charged at point of sale, which is part of general legislation across the UK, that basically kind of hidden charges that you bring out at a later date. You may find in other areas where you've been abroad, the visitor levy comes up at the end of your stay, but general kind of consumer trading legislation doesn't allow that. So we're aware that there are some costs that can be incurred from fees from, the Airbnbs and Booking.com, and it's not quite clear whether they'll charge commission on it. I think the latest hope was Airbnb wouldn't, but Booking.com was not so clear. But there's an awareness that there potential costs. And so businesses are being allowed to keep part of the levy. So either the levy that you will have collected, if we went down the Edinburgh route, you would have collected 100%, but you would only have to pass 98% on to the council. They've allowed 2%, Glasgow allows 1.5%. And again, that's part of what we're doing now. There's an option for you to express an opinion about how much businesses should be allowed to keep in terms of covering their costs. Will the levy apply to non-VAT businesses? That's another decision councillors can make. So far, all the areas that are going ahead have decided it applies to all accommodation businesses, again, around fairness and maximising the levy. How can businesses influence how a visitor levy is spent? In legislation, there is what's known as a visitor levy forum. That forum is made up of people representing tourism industry and tourism businesses. So should we go ahead, I would definitely be looking to put somebody, representing maybe the self-catering sector, somebody representing hotels and the larger accommodation areas. And we would want, via the SSDA and other ways, for you to know who your representatives are on that visitor levy forum. It may also involve community groups. It may involve people representing other interests in tourism. It can't be dominated by councillors, so it can't be dominated by elected representatives. They can be on it, but they would be a minority. I would expect this body to have a powerful voice in recommending how the money is spent. I'm very aware that as I've gone out and about, people are very concerned that it doesn't just go into a black hole of council spending. Partly the legislation protects against that by saying it has to be for tourism, but this forum would also be able to say this is our recommendation on how it should be spent. The final decision would be made by councillors, but that report that they produce would go forward and I think would be very influential. Essentially, the way I think it would work was the Visitor Levy Forum would produce a report. We as officers would comment on that report, and that may be about how it would be implemented or what we would recommend, any issues with that report, which I wouldn't expect there to be because we would have helped the forum understand how they could implement what they're suggesting. And then that will be, I think, a very strong voice influencing how the money is spent. That's what I would expect. And we'd also have to look at how other areas implement that. We wanted to capture at this stage anybody that's interested in serving on the forum. And so there's an opportunity to put yourself forward and say, yeah, I'm interested to do that. And I know we've already had some businesses say that because we do want that to represent tourism. I'm passionately committed to the tourism sector growing, and some of you have met, some of you haven't, but I want your voice to be loud. Okay, this is a question that just came. Is VAT charged on visitor levy? Yes, it is, and that's why we've got the £105 to £106 differences. I know Highland Council were campaigning against this. It's not that anybody made a positive decision that VAT would be applied. It's just the way VAT works. It is naturally applied unless somebody produces some legislation to say it isn't, and that's out with Scottish Government control. We're aware that if you're on the threshold, that does create an issue and that the levy might push some people in. My understanding is that when we look at our figures, if you've got a holiday home, standard holiday homes, you're talking about in the region of 5 standard self-catering holiday homes. And obviously, if you've got a hotel, you'll be through the VAT threshold anyway. So we don't anticipate will affect a lot of people, but obviously it does have quite a large effect for those people who it does affect. The flat rate I've covered earlier, and the interface I've covered earlier. This is a big question. So if we do raise millions of pounds, where should that millions of pounds go? This is the stuff I've talked about already. it has to be substantially used by visitors, and it also has to line up with the responsible tourism strategy. As David mentioned, we have a close working partnership. We meet every week. We've got an activity plan to try and bring that forward. So it's very much an active document. It isn't something that sits on a shelf, but in this context, it does provide a good framework, because we can say, well, that is in the tourism strategy, or that's not in the tourism strategy. And so these are some of the things we could use the money for. As I mentioned, Edinburgh, in fact, all the areas are using it to fund their destination marketing organisations. We know that we don't have the funds that we would like to promote the region out with the region. We know that we don't attract a lot of new visitors, so only 13% of our visitors are new. We attract people who return year after year after year. Now that's great, because the people that come here love it. And when I talk to visitors, they often say to me, oh, I didn't really know this part of Scotland. It's actually really nice, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, it absolutely is. We've got a bit of everything here. We've got lochs, we've got beautiful coastline, we've got decent big hills to climb. You know, it is a beautiful, beautiful area. And one of the ways we could spend the funds is to attract more people. You know, the tourism industry is big. We have 3.3 million people or visits. Come in 2024, they spent almost £500 million, and there's 7,000 people in the industry. It's really important industry. It's really important that we grow it. It's particularly important that we grow it in the west of the region, where there's not so many alternative employment opportunities. And that's what we're working towards. That's what the tourism strategy is about. We're looking to boost it by £1 billion over 10 years and create another 6,000 jobs. And we can see some great things happening already. You know, the Sam Hewen kind of announcement around the distillery in the West, and you can see our alcohol offering has got better and better, and it's great to have Nick and Erin on the call. You know, we can see that we've grown the quality of that, but we need to let people know about it. Particularly, we need to get in more international visitors. We need to have more and better accommodation. They're the guys with the big pockets, particularly the Americans, and we under-index on that. And we need to give them reasons, not just to go and do Edinburgh and Stirling Castle and, you know, Isle of Skye, but to actually come to D&G and see what we've got, around Covenanters, see what we've got around Burns, see what we've got in our distilleries and our visitor attractions and our castles, and that all takes money. So that's one area we could spend the money in terms of promoting the area. Oh, sorry, the other thing that's a key part of the strategy is how can we get people to come over the winter? How can we make more of dark skies? How can we make more of, you know, cozy up over the winter? And how can we say, you know, take a short break and get out of the city? And the SSDA are doing great work on that. You know, part of the council's role is physical signage, and I think if you've ever looked at our brown signage around the region, it's in various states of disrepair. You've got dark brown through to light tan, through to stuff that's out of date. And those signs are quite expensive to maintain and upkeep. Part of the funding could be used for helping businesses replace their brown signs with more up-to-date brown signs where they've become out of date. We've got 1,600 brown signs across the region, and it pains me as I drive around the region to look at them, to be honest, but I don't have a budget that could help with that. Also, we know that our town centre signage on walking tours and things like that is random and, again, out of date and needs a complete revamp. And there's also things we can do when you look around what happens in other towns. They have walks that you can do, and in the pavement you'll see lovely brass plaques showing you the way through and showing you the way to follow it. And we'd love to do something more around Burns in Dumfries, and we'd love to do something in the physical infrastructure. We're doing some really good stuff around audio tours and digital tours, and we'd like to do that. We kind of cover this a little bit later, but our signage around lochs and paths, again, needs a massive upgrade. So that is another area where we can make the visitor experience much improved. And that's, I'm just being blunt, that's not money I can get hold of. It's unlikely to be budgeted in the future. We used to have a ranger service pre-2019, but that's all been cut. Rangers are the guys on the ground. We got some COVID money after COVID, and we were able to put some people out there. It wasn't quite a proper ranger service, but it's very helpful in terms of, I think the polite phrase is educating visitors about the Scottish Outdoor Code, making sure that they behave themselves, that they follow what is beneficial for communities. That's kind of the negative side. On the positive side, they're the guys that are out there saying, actually, this path needs clearing. We need to upgrade this area. We've got this issue. There are eyes and ears on the ground. And also do a lot of social media stuff. You know, here I'm out on this thing, isn't it wonderful? And create a lot of content about reasons you should come to D&G. They also will help us keep the habitats that we've got in better condition than they are. So it'll be an opportunity to have a ranger service. This was something potentially we could have done under a national park, but that obviously was refused. But this, I think, is a massive need in the area and will make a massive difference to the visitor experience. We're very aware of litter as a council. We did a big piece of work to say, what do people feel about litter? As a resident, it's clear the A75 has a big litter problem and makes our area, you know, it saddens me to drive through and see the rubbish. In our cuts, we've just removed bins from the laybys because we've got to cut our funding. So there's a lot more we could do on litter. There's a lot more we could do in residential areas. So it would be potentially a way of doing it. One of the things you can do is upgrade your bins so that you may have seen the solar power bins that squash it all down. That means it needs collected less often, which means that we can keep the areas correct. I'm not saying this attracts visitors, but certainly if they come into something that looks untidy, it definitely detracts from the area. We're very aware that festival events are great for getting people in. We've just had the Oyster Festival have another massive year of 30,000 people come to that. Dumfries and Galloway currently spend £270,000 supporting over 20 events. So it's something we're really committed to. In lots of regions, the event funds have disappeared completely. So we've been fortunate to be able to hang on to us. If we had extra money, we could help local festivals that are starting become a bit more professional. We could help them manage their volunteers better, give them equipment, marketing, that kind of thing. For those events that are running at the moment, we'd like them to be able to focus more on attracting visitors. So it's great to have a festival that attracts visitors and gets people spending. But if what we'd want to be able to do is like, here's some money to get people down from Glasgow, to get people in from Edinburgh, to get people from Newcastle, Liverpool, Leeds, so that they're coming long enough that they therefore need to stay overnight and are coming to whatever the event is, but also starting to use other facilities in the area. And instead of just coming for a day trip, because we're attracting locals and people that are within driving distance, we're starting to attract people from further afield. And that's something we'd like to invest money in. We'd like to attract international visitors, so literature that's out there is not just in English. We'd like to help the established ones expand their programs so that you do want to stay for 2 or 3 days. So there's so much on, you don't just want to do a day trip. And one of the things that I think we could be better at with a bit more funding is to have consistent post-event reporting, i.e. how did Wigton Book Festival do versus the RAC Rally in terms of attracting visitors? How long did people stay? What was the satisfaction with that? And therefore, where should we invest in the future? And having a bit more of a rigorous kind of program on that. You know, the top 3 reasons for coming are the scenery and landscape. And, you know, I've not grown up in the area. I've been here a good chunk of time. It's stunningly beautiful. You know, I grew up in Devon, which is also beautiful, but Dumfries and Galloway is absolutely stunning. And that's why people come. They come for the history and culture, and they come for the outdoor activities. Those are the major reasons people visit the region. I would love to see a visitor attraction fund to grow and improve what is out there to see and do. I think we definitely have an issue of what you do when the weather's wet, and how can we produce more things for people to do in wet days. I think there's a lot more we can do to support people around interpretation and storytelling. We've got some great examples like Devil's Porridge. If you've ever been there, tells a fantastic story. But speaking for us as a council, the Burns House in Dumfries, and I'm not having the museum service would say this to you, we could transform that into something really quite exciting with funds. At the moment, it's a small house with a few artifacts in it. So there's loads more we could do to get people to come. Obviously, we've got the Galloway distilleries we talked about. We want to attract more big visitor attractions here. Sometimes these attractions could do with more people to stay open longer, or to try and expand. And one of the advantages of this fund is if you've ever applied for grants from local government or a public sector, you'll find there's a very strict set of rules about how you have to spend it, what can be spent on. This fund, and obviously when we get funds and we disperse them, they often come with a load of rules that we have to obey, okay, and limitations. Because this fund can be used for capital or revenue, i.e. permanent bits and pieces, investment in infrastructure, but also people, there will be an opportunity to possibly sponsor posts to help visitor attractions expand. And I don't think it'll be permanent, but we might say, well, look, get a marketing officer in for a year, we'll fund that post. Let's see how much a marketing officer can expand your business. And maybe at the end of the year, you'll have a business case that says you can keep that person on. I think we have a wonderful outdoors, but we need to develop the outdoor experiences. We have relatively few compared with other areas. So I'm talking about rock climbing, canoeing. We've got the Galloway Activity Centre, a big fan of that on a personal level and a professional level. We've got water sports at Stranraer, but maybe some of the smaller stuff around foraging, around days out, around the kind of individual stuff. Can we help more people start up? Can we provide them with equipment? Can we provide them with mentoring? Another of the things we'd like to do is we've obviously, you may or may not aware, I've had shared prosperity funding over the last couple of years. That comes to an end this year. We don't know what funding will be available next year. Part of my role is through Business Gateway. Business Gateway is here to help startups, mainly that 0 to 3 years of getting going. I would love to see a fund for tourism businesses. So it'd have to be tourism businesses. And these are some of the things that grant might be used for: digital transformation, online booking, improving websites. We know now that people search digitally, and that's really crucial. And we'd love to help people get better websites. EV charging points, we've invested quite a lot through the Shared Prosperity Fund on EV charging points. It's very clear that EV charging, people with EVs are looking for a charging point at their accommodation. And if I could have whatever I wanted, I would want to have a fund so that every accommodation provider had an EV charging point, which means if you're coming to D&G, you can stay wherever you like. And we are a sustainable travel place. It's public transport, we'd love to improve it, but the reality is most people come in a car. And so the way we can be sustainable is to attract EVs. There's obviously other stuff we'd like to do around net zero, anything you can do to replace waste, anything you can do for solar power, wind power, all that kind of stuff. We have some priority sectors in the tourism strategy: cycling, literary tourism, dark skies agritourism, equestrian tourism. And it might be that we want to put funds into that. SOS have put in some great funds into cycling infrastructure. But again, I would want it that, if you've got accommodation, we can give you a grant for putting in secure bike storage, because that makes all the difference. If you've got a £2,000 or £3,000 bike, unless you know there's secure bike storage at your place, you're not going to stay there, essentially. we have opportunities around travel trade training, and travel trade is all around how do you attract international visitors? Can you get yourself in a position where your accommodation or your visitor attraction attracts that kind of tourist? They are the guys with the big pockets. They are the guys that stay longer and spend more, but you have to get your product right for them. Visit Scotland run a Connect program, which is their international conference where you can meet buyers and where you can learn how to crack that market. And we would love to put money into that to help people do that. It's not something I can do at the moment. And final area where funds might be used, SSDA have run, in conjunction with lots of other people, driven by the SSDA, have run a brilliant piece of work around how do we get more people into the industry? You know, how do we get more people to restaurants and shops and that kind of industry where we need a lot of people, hotels, chefs. And one of the things that came out very clearly around that is that the youngsters that are coming in, you know, they've gone through the COVID generation, they're a screen generation, they really need some help around becoming customer focused. And we'd love to run a program that helps them gain the skills and confidence to be excellent at customer service. So that's some of the things that we might be able to do with grants. And the other area is the council obviously has this huge amount of path network, 1,100 miles of path network, massive. And it's obviously, as we talked about earlier, a key part of why people come to the region and a key part of why I, as a resident, love the region. But again, the funds have been cut on this. This would enable us to invest, you know, to keep them open, to resurface and widen them. If you're in my area around Castle Douglas, you'll know that there was the Galloway Glens attracted a lot of funding, and that really helped keep some of the paths in much better condition, much more accessible around the Threave Garden, down to Threave Castle. And it's being able to invest in that. The signage we've talked about, way markers. We have very few sheltered, weatherproof seating areas in the region, and I'm not aware of any, in fact. And if you go to other places, particularly seaside locations, you'll be able to see that. We need to provide that so you can come and enjoy an area without getting absolutely soaked. And we know that the weather comes and goes in this area. So if you can shelter for a bit and then carry on with your walk or the beach. As I mentioned earlier, we have had issues with motorhomes where they do and don't park, dumping black and grey waste. This would enable us to upgrade some of our picnic areas, New England Bay, places like that, so that we could provide safe parking spaces for them, and we could start saying, well, you can park here, but you can't park over there. And it would give us a chance to upgrade those areas to improve them for the environment, improve them for residents who use them a lot. And also, again, in our coasts and parks, which we'll cover in a second, we don't have cycle racks. So if you cycle to go for a walk, there's nowhere really to put your bike. Similarly, there's a lot we can do in parks. I think our parks are beautiful in large part, but could be improved. Signage could be improved. The facilities could be improved. My own local park, we used to have sort of putting. We used to have take a boat out on the loch. That's all gone in the cuts. But it's a chance to make more of our parks. If you've used our council toilets, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody. You'll find they're of varying quality. I was doing tourism during the COVID years when we shut the toilets, and I can tell you that toilets are a massive indicator of whether people feel comfortable in the region. And we're aware that our toilet provision is patchy and some of our toilets are not great, I would say. So there's a lot we could do to improve them. Some of them don't have any lighting, and we could do a lot to remote light those. Some areas, so for example, say bus tours into Dumfries. If you're going to come to a bus tour and park in Brooms Road car park, you need a toilet. Bus tours are generally older folk, and what they want when they come off a bus is anybody really. You want the toilet and you want somewhere to eat and drink. Well, we've got lots of eat and drinking in Dumfries, but we don't have anywhere near the where you park the coach for a toilet. So this would enable us to invest in things like that, which would enable us to sell Dumfries as a tourism destination for coach companies. So I'm not saying it's just Dumfries, I'm just using it as an example of how these kind of investments enable us to sell to different audiences. Changing places toilets, we put some of those out and about. Those are really important for disabled people, for older people, which we get a lot of. And then there's a list there of all kind of other stuff we could do, nature trails, wildflower meadows, you know, the signage. There's lots of stuff we could do, and this would allow us to invest in that. I think I've kind of covered this really. The Visitor Levy Forum, I view it as incredibly important, and I'm really looking forward to having it, if we do go ahead, if that's a result, to having some strong voices really putting the case for investment to definitely be, you know, to benefit the tourism industry. So that's everything I wanted to say. What I'll do is let me go back to the chat and just see if there's anything I haven't picked up. I think I've picked up the question about VAT registration. I agree with you, Jenny. It's not ideal. I wouldn't want it to be like that. I think it's wrong, but it is the current situation. Your second point, I think they are Airbnb and Booking.com are still working out whether they take commission on this. The last I heard, Airbnb had made a positive decision not to. Booking.com looked like they would do by default. I think there's a long way to go on that argument. I think it will be clear by the time we get there, if we do get there. Brilliant. Thank you for putting the link in, David. That's really good. Okay, so let's cover motorhomes. Basically, we can't, there's no way to apply a visitor levy to motorhomes. We're looking at some ways that we'll have to go through a process where they can donate. That may or may not happen. I'm a firm supporter of that. We know that in our region, at Calaverock Nature Reserve, you get an opportunity to donate for parking there. We also know that that's occurred in the Calaverock Key area there, and that works when people do donate, but we can't impose a visitor levy because there's no way of collecting it at the moment. What I would say about motorhomes is that is generally when there's a mixture of paid stays and unpaid stays. So even though they may stay in areas which are unpaid, they are likely also to stay in campsites and therefore pay a visitor levy. That's generally the behaviour. No, it's not, Christine. It's not per person. It's for the amount that they pay. However many people stay, it's not a personal levy. So if you're going back to my example, if you're £100 paid for 4 people for a night, that's fine. If I go just with my dog, it's exactly the same. I'm paying the £100. So it's it would go up. Jenny, yes, unfortunately, I accept that point. If you're near the VAT threshold, it does create an issue. David's put a link to the tourism strategy. Thank you, David. Linda, I don't know if you're talking about motorhomes. There's quite a lot of research that motorhome users do spend in the area. We have a lot of people that go and catch the ferry. Absolutely, they don't stop. They get on the ferry, and there's no mechanism by which we can do that. But I was chatting to a pub owner who has a facility nearby where motorhomes stay. It's not a paid facility, and basically it's keeping his pub open at the moment because he said actually they spend more than a lot of the other visitors he gets. So there's a mixture there. Melanie, yeah, they're definitely they definitely are. They've definitely done that. I think there's no evidence from anywhere around the globe that I'm aware of that a tourism tax has had a negative impact on an area. So I think it's quite hard to do a robust assessment that's based on evidence showing a reduction. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but it's very difficult to find any data that would enable you to do something that's robust. We will certainly produce a report that will indicate. So one of the questions we're asking visitors is, would it put you off staying? And would it change your behavior? And so we will definitely report that. And if lots of people say, no, I definitely wouldn't come, it's a real big issue for me, then that will come out. I think even in areas where they implemented like Amsterdam, I'm not saying we like Amsterdam, but in those areas where it's pretty high, over 12%, it hasn't affected tourism in the way that they expected. So yes, visitor behavior will definitely be part of what comes back. The percentage level is up to councillors to decide. You know, it can be one through to the highest is 7%. What Scottish ministers have said is that if it was excessive, they might intervene. I think practically, if it was excessive, then there would be a debate. We will obviously, as part of the feedback, people can say what percentage they think it should be, and we will feed that back. Okay, I think we've yeah, accept your points on. I'm not an expert on that overbroad, and I think I've covered the thing on motorhomes. In terms of, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, Hive Manager. The areas I've talked about are the areas that we'll be asking about. Within the survey, people can make a suggestion about where they think the money should be spent. I would expect that if it was to go ahead, that the suggestions on spend would form, you know, that would go into the Visitor Levy Forum, which would then inform their report about where they think the spend is. I don't think we're looking for, you know, what happens in the Galloway Forest or what happens in Kirkcudbright or what happens in Port Patrick. I think it will be very, I would expect the approach to say in D&G, you know, we know tourism's massively important. It generally how the council's run things before has been to say, here's a fund, say, for EV chargers, and that's available to everybody. We don't have a track record of picking winners in particular areas from a grant point of view. Our general approach, if we were to do business grants, would be this is available to everybody who meets the criteria. That's if we went forward and grants were part of what was suggested, I would expect them to work that way. I think with just looking at your second point, there is an issue with motorhomes. There's an issue, particularly in the west of the region. There's some issues around the dune, and I am working to try and make sure we have powers to control that. We can't control whether people park in laybys on roads or just park up. That's covered by traffic regulations. All I would say is the thing I said before, people definitely, different people have different preferences, but people who generally park out with campsites will go to a campsite every 3 or 4 days. Partly that's around black waste, partly that's around having a shower, partly that's around kind of having a rest period. Okay, Jamie, that's I think the issue around motorhomes is understood. I've heard mutterings around Scottish Government looking at ways that they can kind of tax motorhomes in some way. And I'm very aware in my role of the strength of feeling around that. It's often expressed to me, and you know, people say use the term freeloaders. So I know that people are looking at that. It's not something that's close at the moment, and there's obviously some technology reasons. I don't know if there's any more questions. I'm happy now. I think I've answered everything in the chat, David. Up to you as to how you'd like to run the rest, the other bit of it.
Super. Well, firstly, thank you very much, John. A lot of detail there, while also being, you know, clear and honest about what is unknown. Jamie, welcome to the session. As Gowan said, the first half's recorded, so you can catch up later on. maybe if I just throw it open, you can continue to put questions in the chat box, but also you could wave a physical hand or a digital hand. What I'm going to do first is ask questions first. I will give time for people to express views and talk about, your concerns. It's really important to hear that. But first off, any questions for John, either in the chat box or just raise a hand. Jamie.
Yeah, I just really, there's in terms of the context of this. I mean, we've been letting cottages, holiday cottages, for the last 25 years here. We've got 34 beds currently that we provide, and it's just got progressively harder. We just get taxed more and more. We've had the licensing scheme that was, frankly, a massive pain in the arse and a cost. We've gradually the cost of getting the rubbish taken away and all these kind of things has crept up. In the meantime, actually, we've had less service for that money because it's only every other week, and we've got problems with smelly bins, and tourists don't like that. Gradually and this is really, however you dress it up, just another tax. And in the meantime, services in Dumfries and Galloway, for reasons we all know, I mean, the welfare spending and all the rest of it has gone up massively. But the potholes and all the rest of it are getting worse and worse. And if the council does this, then they're going to be hitting the wealth generators, the people who are actually doing the graft to actually get the economy, keep the economy going in Dumfries and Galloway. The people like us who actually, frankly, work really. If we calculated our time we spend on mucking out holiday cottages and dealing with difficult customers and all the rest of it, it's barely worth our time already. And if you put another levy on us, then I think a lot of us will just walk. I mean, we're already, I think, probably going to be letting fewer cottages next year than this year, and finding good tenants for them if we can. I mean, and that all has a knock-on effect on the museums and the tourist attractions. I'm a trustee of the John Paul Jones Museum. I mean, I think we limp from year to year. And I'm afraid I'm quite cynical about this. I mean, sure, I know you've produced a great list of things you want to spend the money on, but the experience is that a lot of this money just disappears in bureaucracy before it actually reaches the good outcomes of the rangers and the brown signs and all the rest of it. So I'm sorry, I am a bit cynical about this.
So Jamie, thank you. John, if you want to come back first.
Yeah, because the bureaucracy kind of point is raised in every meeting I'm in, right? Okay. And I think it's been raised by our internal management, and it's been raised by councillors when they voted for starting early engagement. So it is a really hot topic. I think what we would be looking to do is to learn from other areas and to learn from what Edinburgh and Glasgow and Aberdeen do, and to potentially share services with other areas, and to absolutely minimise it. So I can't give you any guarantees about that, Jamie, but I can tell you that is absolutely front and centre. And one of the things we would have to do in the report going forward is to make a statement about what costs we think that would be and how we would manage that, which we've done an initial stab at, but really needs to be part of it. So I totally accept that as a concern.
Thank you very much, Jamie, for sharing that powerful testimony and insight. I'll talk at the end of the meeting about sort of the SSDA's role and position on these things. But any other questions for John? Also opening it out as Jamie has to, opinions and reflections on the impact as you see it on you and your business. You're welcome to put a comment or question in the chat box or raise a hand digitally or in person. Gowan.
Christine Milligan was wanting to come in. Just don't be shy, Christine, just unmute yourself.
Thanks for flagging, Gowan. Christine, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Thank you. Sorry, for some reason I've come, as you say, I'm coming up as a blob with no hand. So very sorry about that. Thank you very much, John, for your presentation. I think there are a few comments that I would like to make. Firstly, all the examples that you gave came from major cities. The way that they're working successfully in places like Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, and so on. And the point I would like to make is that Dumfries and Galloway is very different. We're a rural area and we've got very different issues. Economic, I come from the perspective of a holiday home owner. And I think some of the things that Jamie said resonate with very many of us. But I think also I'd like to add that economically, I don't think this is the time to be introducing a visitor levy in Dumfries and Galloway. From a holiday owner, we're seeing a difference in the patterns of booking. We're seeing people going for shorter bookings rather than the longer bookings that we used to see. A lot more 4-day breaks instead of 7-day breaks, and people booking much later in the year rather than earlier, which makes it much more difficult for our planning. And also for us, I think there is, what you have to bear in mind, there's been a huge rise in costs for all of us as holiday owners. Things like, you talked about wanting more winter breaks, which is brilliant. But then, of course, the electricity costs, the heating costs are substantially higher. And at the same time, people expect to have a lower cost on their winter break. So for us, the profits are much, much tighter. So all of these things, I think, need to be borne in mind. And I think the same would go, I'm talking for holiday lets, of course, but I think the same goes for bed and breakfast, for hotels, and so on. And we've also had this new government tax on not being able to claim against the furnishings for holiday lets and so on, which to me is ridiculous. How can you run a holiday let with no furnishings, or if you can't claim against them? So there are all sorts of things going on at the moment, which I think just make it economically the wrong time to be even thinking about this if we want to promote tourism in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. John, up to you whether you'd want to come back to those, and then I
don't have anything to add to that. I think, you know, that's experience. There was something in the chat I was just going to pick up.
Go ahead, John.
Which were specific questions. Brown tourism signs, will the rules change? Essentially not. They've slightly changed in that Visit Scotland now you don't have to be graded by them. They've stopped their grading system, so it becomes, I think, easier to get a brown tourism sign than it was from a Visit Scotland point of view. We don't have any input into how that works. That's their process, and that's what they're allowed to do. They're legislatively asked to do. So there is a slight change in the criteria. Maybe what we can do, David, is pop that in and you can have a look at the criteria. So I think it is easier in that you don't have the ongoing cost that you used to have with the grading system. But I'm not saying it's radically different, but I think it's slightly easier. Sorry, I'm open to the next question, I think.
That's great. I'll turn to Mel in a second. Before I do, just really quickly on brown signs. So brown signs are something that businesses have expressed concern about, quite rightly. The clue is many of them aren't brown anymore. They're green and fuzzy and pointed to businesses that don't exist. That is a stated priority now in the strategy. That gives us a space to be able to act, and credit to both councils that there is, active work in this area. As John said, depending on which roads the brown signs are on, it depends whose responsibility it is. But we've facilitated some really positive meetings with the councils and with Transport Scotland. It's a sort of a very administratively complicated area, to be honest, and manage expectations. Budgets are very low, but what we have is political willing from the two councils, associate Visit Scotland, to act in a recognition there's a challenge. Mel, go ahead.
Hi, thanks ever so much. I think this has been really interesting, John, and I think obviously bringing all of these conversations out into the open is really important. I think obviously from what's happening across Scotland, it's really interesting then focusing on Dumfries and Galloway. There's quite a lot of focus on obviously what a TVL can bring in, and if done right, it could be a potential mechanism of funding. I think some of the things that you put through on, you know, aspirations for the region is really interesting. Communities, the work we've been doing with communities, a lot of communities are already doing a lot of activity either through their own funding mechanisms or through volunteering, and it's a really good way to look at grassroots and what's happening and how communities can be enabled to look after parks, to look after toilets, and signing and just being empowered could take some of the pressure away from the council if done in the right way, you know, when they have access to wind farm money and things like that. So, you know, it's not just a TVL is a one size fits all in terms of funding or nothing. I think if a TVL is the right mechanism, then it can help. But also from a rural context, it's really important that we understand the impact. Kat at Mercat Tours in Edinburgh is already really concerned because she's already seeing a lot of visitors having less spend, including international visitors having less spend on things like tours and experiences, food and drink. So it might just not be accommodation, it might be those experiences as well. One thing I wanted to ask, I've had a look at the surveys, and it's not actually asking businesses their opinion on a TVL. And I think that would be really important. It's asking businesses how they would want to spend, you know, spend the money, and there's some fixed, you know, kind of criteria, and it's very difficult to respond. So I think asking the question about a TVL is really important.
No, great points, Mel. The last bit's really, really crucial, John. The last bit of that question.
Yeah, it is, because no, there is. If you go to our survey, we very deliberately crafted it. You can absolutely say, I don't like a TVL under any conditions. And if you say, that's a very clear expression, and that has been expressed and that has been captured. If you say, no, I could see it might work, then you get an opportunity to say how you might think it would work. And certainly in terms of spend, that first box is an empty box for people to type in exactly what they think, and then it does give a selection of options. We'll analyze the open text using AI and different tools, as well as the options. So people definitely have an option to say they're not in favour, and I can assure you a significant proportion of businesses have already said that, and I presume will continue to say that. So no,
I didn't see that on the business survey.
Yeah,
maybe
it's
okay.
definitely in there, Mel, because
Okay.
we it was what we would have done anyway, but we got feedback from other areas, you know, where people felt that, you know, there wasn't an opportunity, and it's really important. Yeah, I've got to reflect back to members what you feel, and that is definitely being collected.
Absolutely. And I mean, just from our perspective, again, John's been admirably consultative through this process, shared a draft of the survey. Part of the feedback we gave to that draft is, you know, that we thought it would have been good to have that question at the beginning of the survey rather than the end of the survey, but I can absolutely assure that question is asked, and I've seen the collations of the interim data that absolutely a simple how many are in favour and how many against is the headline figure. The worst thing in the world would be for us collectively as an industry to say, we lose faith in this survey, let's not complete it. The crucial thing, and I'll talk more about this at the end of the meeting, is as many businesses as possible complete this survey and they share their view and they get to the end and they press submit. That is the only way of being heard in this process. So I cannot emphasize that enough. Jenny, you've very patiently been waiting. Go ahead.
Yeah, a comment on the survey, because I have done it. And I initially was going to say I am totally against this levy because I think it's very badly designed in the way it is. It certainly should not be counted towards that threshold. And I was a bit upset, John, in the way you glibly said that's not going to impact many businesses, because I don't know where you get that data from, but I think a lot of small family businesses will be impacted by that. However, I am forced to not click I'm totally against this because I want to comment on what, if we're forced to have this levy, what it should look like. So the data is being I mean, I didn't put I'm totally against it because I wanted to comment on, you know, what it's like. So the data is not accurate, and that's a fault in the survey.
That's
I
really
was not given the option to say I'm totally against it, but I want to comment on the design of it, because if I'm forced into it, I want to have a say on that. And I was quite cross about that, because I felt I was being manipulated to say something I didn't want to say.
so really put John on the technical detail of the survey.
No, Jenny is correct.
Jenny, I am correct.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. We'll take that on board and have a think about that. That's all I'll say at this stage.
Yeah, because I think there are better ways a visitor levy could be done if we're forced into it. I think it's the wrong time, as has been said. I think accommodation, particularly small businesses, small family businesses, are really feeling the strain at the moment with all the different legislation that's come in. It is becoming so difficult. And this may well be the final straw for us, in the same way Jamie was saying for him. It might very well be the final straw. But having said that, I do think there are ways a visitor levy could be brought in that would be less destructive. Not under the current legislation from the Scottish Government, because as normal, they have not listened to industry till after they've done it, and then they decide, oh, actually, maybe we should listen to industry. But the ASSC has been lobbying on this and has better ideas. I mean, I would be in favour of, say, a QR code where actually you put the onus on the visitor to do an honesty system. I think you'd find it's a lot less onerous on the paperwork and would possibly generate as much without all the costs. But then if it didn't have to come through the accommodation provider, it didn't count to our VAT turnover, then we wouldn't have to close for part of the year. I mean, the net impact on us is our revenue will be down and our visitor numbers will be down, because otherwise we're going to have to add 20% on our fees or go. So the net impact from our small business, and we are probably not alone, is that there will be fewer visitors coming to D&G if you bring this in. Full stop. The admin side of it, because I'm getting fed up of paperwork, I didn't go into tourism to do lots of paperwork. The admin side means I might just say, I give up. I've had enough. You know, the government does not support us. They want to drive us into the ground. That's the feeling I've got. And I might just walk away. But it is so badly designed, on top of everything else that has been badly designed, that we are beginning to feel that we are just a kicking post.
Jenny, thank you very much for the input. There's two separate bits, if I may, to that. The first point around the technical point of the survey is, I'm not saying the second point isn't very serious, but is really, really important. I've got a really clear view on this, which is I don't think any aspect of feeding into the survey of how, were a TVL to happen, it should be designed, should be predicated on your answer to the first question. So, I mean, I'd be really keen that we go away and look at that at speed. And if we are able to bring about a change to that, I'm keen to go back to everyone in this meeting. If you have already completed the survey and said something different to what you actually feel because of the design of the survey, and it's really important that we look at that quickly and we go back to you and you're able to resubmit if possible. And Jenny, your powerful testimony about the impact is really, really, really useful. I'm going to turn back to Jamie unless there's any other input from anyone that hasn't spoken.
Sorry,
yet.
David, I was
Sorry,
just going to pick up Christine's point. Could there be exclusions for locals? That would be a decision for members, yes. And I would not be surprised if that comes back as feedback from resident surveys and business surveys.
Thank you, John. Jamie, go ahead.
Sorry, if I can just come back in just a couple of things, just on the question of VAT. I know there's a lot of concern of people who are below the VAT threshold that are saying, this is going to push us over and all the rest of it. And I fully sympathise with that. But I just, from a if you like, a slightly larger business, not a huge business. I mean, an SME in the greater scheme of things, but we are above the VAT threshold. The VAT actually makes the whole thing of letting holiday cottages a pretty marginal activity. I mean, we monitor it and we try and make sure that we're actually making a bit more money than we would if we just let properties normally. And so we're at a 20% disadvantage to smaller cottages, to people who are below the VAT threshold. And so just a slight adjustment of 1% here and there for a levy makes the whole thing not worthwhile for us. We would just say, right, that's it. We're big sigh of relief. We don't have to mess about with laundry and all the rest of it anymore. No more holiday cottages. And bang, that's 34 less visitors in this part of Dumfries and Galloway every week, going to the shops and the pubs and whatever. And the other thing to hoist on board is that one of the things that's made letting holiday cottages less and less attractive over the years is that we are at the mercy of a global cartel of big tech companies, Airbnb and Booking.com, who make our life more and more miserable every year by forcing us to pay very large commissions. They came in a few years ago into the market, cut the commissions, drove all the traditional agencies out of business, and they're now operating a virtual monopoly, really. So we're having to pay 20% or something to them, and if they're beyond the reach of national governments. They're based in America or Ireland in some cases, or wherever they happen to be. They don't even pay tax in this country, I don't think. And this levy is just adding to that problem that we've already got. So I do urge you just to really focus on a bit of scenario planning here. Get alongside some of the tourism providers in Dumfries and Galloway at different sizes with different issues, different problems, and just wargame through exactly what the impact of this levy might be. I mean, if it's microscopically small, then that might not be too big, too bad. But I mean, but there again, it might not actually deliver very much. And really, a lot of these things that we're talking about, frankly, should be delivered by the council anyway. I mean, we all pay rates, business rates and all the rest of it, and charges for picking up the rubbish and all the rest of it. So I do think that you've got a long way to go to persuade us that this is the right thing. Sorry, sermon over. Thank you.
No, that's very useful, Jamie. Friends, before I bring the meeting to a close, quick summary points. Any final questions for John or comments? Haven't seen just yet. So, I mean, basically, I want to end by saying a big thank you to John. As I said at the start of this meeting, John is the tourism official, and I know this because I meet with John at least once a week, very often 2 or 3 times a week. John gets out of bed to support tourism, and he's chosen to come and have this meeting and do it again and again in each of these LLDD meetings. And I think it's really good that we've got spaces like this. I think it's really important we learn from the national park sort of debacle, and what we want is spaces like this where everyone is respected and everyone can share their voices. So I very sincerely want to thank John and reassure people and encourage you not to be fatalistic. There have been different outcomes of this early engagement process from different local authorities, and to a significant degree, they have been informed by what businesses say. And that's why the most important thing that you do is that you fill the official survey in. We'll send an email to you. It'll be the top thing at the email. You need to fill that in. If you feel you've already filled it in, and because of a technical point around the design of the survey, you haven't been able to say what you actually feel, let John and I know, and we will make sure that your view fully is represented in the survey. Everyone needs to have faith in the survey. The second thing that you can do is come to your nearest locally led destination development meeting. We divided the South Scotland up into 14 areas. If you don't know, twice a year, we go to each of those areas, we bring the businesses together. John is going to come to all 7 of the D&G ones to be able to, again, give this presentation and have that discussion. Thirdly, you can also share your views on this subject with the SSDA itself. You'll see in the chat box, there's a link to that. I'm hesitant in sharing that because that's just a private link to share your views to the SSDA for us to represent them. Don't get confused with that with the more important official one, which is how you have your views heard. I've also put in the chat box a link that you can see how the SSDA is representing our members' views, both in our closed conversations with the Council, SSDA and Visit Scotland, but also publicly viewable, including in Parliament, the Economy and Fair Work Committee. The SSDA, as I see it, has two roles in this space. One is as a industry representative body, and I'm keen to reassure every single point that has been made in this meeting are points that I have very actively represented to the councils, to Visit Scotland, to SOSI, to both governments and in Parliament. So continue to share your opinions with me. But it's really important to say, in these conversations where I'm encouraging and supporting businesses to feed in their views, I need to do that without saying this is the official SSDA line, because it's really important that that's a neutral space and that businesses are encouraged to come share their opinion, whatever that opinion is, because it's really important. At the end of the process, the outcomes of this research, of this survey, are hold water. The worst case scenario would be if we do this and someone's able to say, well, we can ignore all of that because of X, Y, and Z, which is why it's important the surveys got right. John, thank you very much for your time. Also, businesses, members, friends, thank you very much for your time. I hope it's been useful for you. Please do share your opinion, and I promise that will be heard and considered by D&G Council as it considers next steps with this. Any final questions, comments before we close? If not, have a great day, and thanks so much for your time, guys. All the very best. Bye for now.